Hi there. I'm Dr. Jimenez. I am an associate professor of music at Valley City State University, and I also run the jazz ensemble there. I wanted to make this video to help you with the North Dakota All-State Jazz Trumpet audition. I'm sure that you probably would like to hear the etude, and I'll cut right to that shortly, but I wanted to talk about some ways that you might practice the etude, some stylistic things, and also talk to you a little bit about some things that you might do if you want to do some improvisation. So this audition etude, or really excerpt, comes from a piece called Reunion Blues by Alan Baylock. It's a challenging, very high energy blues chart, and this is coming from a shout section that's about 2/3 of the way through the piece. The tempo is very fast, the range is fairly demanding. Even with those things, though, we need to make sure that we are sounding as musical as we can. And I think the way to do that is going to be through dynamics. So I've written in some dynamics here on my copy of the excerpt. You can see a gradual build-up leading up to that high C, and then a forte piano on the high B flat. That's also something that's going to help with maintaining your chops throughout the entire piece. You can see also that I've written in some -2 or -3s. There I'm just indicating when to cut off the fall. There are a lot of different ways to interpret the fall. In my mind, I think it should be fairly fast and relatively abrupt. This isn't really a greasy blues, if you will, and so we need to keep things fairly tight and fairly clean. So we want to mark those cutoffs for those falls. You'll notice at measure 107, that high E flat, I've given a longer fall than all of the rest, and that's basically just because it's the pinnacle of that section. And if we cut off that E flat too abruptly, it will sound like there's some dead space between the E flat and the G on beat 4 in the next measure. So we want to maintain that forward movement as we push towards the high C that's leading us up into a new section. And so making that one fall a little longer than the rest helps to maintain that momentum. So something that inevitably comes up in discussing these lead trumpet parts is equipment. And I would say that equipment can help, but it won't make or break whether or not you are able to perform the excerpt. Different mouthpieces, different instruments will help you to achieve musical, artistic goals in terms of sound and so on, but they will not serve as a quick fix for any issues that you are encountering. So I would say use the instrument that you have. Use the mouthpiece with which you are familiar, that you've been using consistently throughout. You don't have to have the latest and greatest and best instrument to successfully perform this audition. The instrument that I played on, it's a Yamaha from the 1980s. It's pretty well destroyed in some areas. It's something I found at a thrift store, actually. The mouthpiece is one by Parduba, which is not one that people commonly use today. They're nice mouthpieces, have a pretty long history in jazz at least, but it can be played on anything. I'll give you an example. This is an old cornet, so it's not even a trumpet. The mouthpiece here is an old Bach New York 7A, and again, it's a cornet mouthpiece in a cornet. The 7A mouthpiece is very deep. It's not something you would typically use for an excerpt like this, but it'll work. It also works. Is it necessarily the right tool for the job? No, you can do it with whatever you've got. So if you're in the position that I was when I was in high school, where your instrument is the one that looked like it had been dragged through the mud and was in the Civil War, and everyone else has these nice, shiny, brand new instruments. Don't let those sorts of things get to you. I would imagine that the high E flat might be a bit intimidating. I certainly would have been intimidated even just a few years ago trying to go for the E flat. Here are my suggestions. Success in the upper register is dependent upon the right shape here, the right muscle firmness here, and the right shape and positioning of things in the mouth, mostly the tongue, but also here. So the right shaping, embouchure wise, is going to depend on your own anatomy and how you play. But generally speaking, in the upper register, these areas need to firm and pucker or press in against each other. If you think of someone playing tuba, for example, or when we are playing trumpet, and we're playing higher, we're not completely mashing the lips together necessarily, but we're making a very small opening. Small this way and small this way. And that opening would be called an aperture. Now here, these muscles, particularly here, those muscles need to be quite firm, particularly here and here. You might find as you're playing that the corners of your lips come down. They might perhaps come backward a little bit. It's not necessarily ideal. They might come up, also not ideal, but any port in a storm, if it works. Generally speaking, these should just firm up while staying relatively in place or perhaps coming downward like that. When it comes to the inside of the mouth, the tongue needs to rise up like you are saying hiss or this, like thistle. So the tongue raises up, gets very close to the top teeth in the front. It also spreads outward in the back, in my experience. So if this is the normal tongue, when we're going higher, the back of the tongue is flattening, spreading out, often pushing up against your molars on the top, like that. We are making a very small cavity within the mouth for air to pass through. So the other part of this upper register issue is air. You've probably often been told that you need to use more air. And I would say that's mostly true. We need a good amount of air because the air is being compressed and pressurized. And if there is not enough air to compress, we don't get any compression, we don't get any air speed. When that's happening, as we're playing, it typically feels like there's a brick wall, for lack of a better word. There's a ceiling, and you can absolutely feel it as you're playing. And you might peek over the top of it just for a second, and you'll get some pee-ah sorts of things. But if we don't have enough air to compress, we're never really going to be able to look over the top of that wall or break our way through that ceiling, if that makes sense. The flip side of that is it does not necessarily take an enormous amount of air flowing out as we play. All of this and everything in the inside of the mouth makes it so that the air is not going to be it produces a lot of restriction. The volume of air that's going to be passing through that is not going to be very high, but the air that is passing through will be going very fast. If you have a garden hose and you put your thumb over the end of the hose, less water comes out, but the water goes further because we have put on a restriction where the water would be exiting and increase its velocity. And so that's what we're doing here, here, and with the tongue. So if we breathe to the point where we're like full of air to bursting, that might be too much. You're probably going to be feeling uncomfortable as you play the passages, and that discomfort will lead to tension. Tension will lead to pushing and pressure against the lips. We will run into that ceiling again. So the amount of air that you need is plenty, but not too much. And the air needs to be highly compressed. And we compress it here inside the mouth by how we manipulate the tongue, what we do with our lips, etc. That creates compression, but we also do it with our abdominal muscles. We don't want to suck them in, rather they need to relax outward. And the compression is like this. It might feel like that rather than all going in, something like that. You might also feel it almost as like a lift upward. The big thing is to not suck in one's gut like that and tense everything up, but rather to relax it, bring that energy forward, that direction rather than inward. with the abdominal muscles. So I said I was going to discuss improvisation, and it's something that I would highly encourage you to do as part of the audition process and just do in general. I think that for the improvisation part of the audition, we want to select something that is going to contrast with the required excerpt and also give us confidence coming into the improvisation section. And I think an ideal tune to select for this improvisation section would be the tune So What by Miles Davis. So the reason I think that one would be a good one is it contrasts quite a bit with the required excerpt. It's in a minor key rather than a major key. It's slower and more understated and calm, where the given excerpt is very loud and boisterous. So What is a 32 measure long form that uses only 2 scales. For the first 16 measures, we use our E Dorian scale. It's the same notes as our D major. We just start on E instead. That's the first 16 measures. The next 8 measures, it's the same idea. We just change the scale from E Dorian to F Dorian. F Dorian uses the same notes as E flat major. We just start on F instead of E flat. F Dorian. And those are the notes. The harmony goes by very slowly. The first 16 measures all just stay on one chord. We just use one scale. So we don't need to worry about how many chords have gone by and how we're going to try and fit into these different chord changes. We can just stay in our key, stay in our lane, and make a melody. The contrasting section in the middle is really the same. We just move everything by 1/2 step. And the end moves back down to where we started. So it's a very comfortable tune to improvise over. It contrasts significantly with the provided excerpt, and I think it would be a great one to choose if you choose to improvise on the audition. So those are my suggestions for how you might approach your jazz trumpet audition for Allstate this year. If you have questions, my contact information is on the VCSU website. It's very easy to find. Thanks for watching, and best of luck with your auditions.